They had stumbled upon the decomposing body of Sonny Red Indelicado, a mobster who had gone missing just 3 weeks before. Rumor had it that he and 2 other gangsters had been murdered in a bloody power struggle within the Bonanno crime family, one of 5 Italian families that ran the New York Mafia.
This was huge. 3 major players in a crime family blown away all at the same time. And for more than 20 years, it was a secret. Nobody knew how it happened, where it happened, or any of the real details of how this caper was pulled off.
By 2004, the FBI had been trying to close the book on the triple murders for years. From the start, the prime suspect in the killings had been Joseph Massino, then a mid-level mobster who was destined to become the boss of the Bonannos. Massino and the FBI were to play a game of cat and mouse for decades.
That's what we're talking about.
Only now can the full story be revealed, using the FBI excavation, chilling trial testimony, and vivid memories of an undercover agent.
I always thought every day, you know, I'm going to get killed as a gangster and not as an FBI agent. What a hell of a way to go.
In 2004, FBI agents trained in crime scene investigation gathered at their headquarters as they would at the beginning of any mission. They were headed to the site in Queens, New York, on the outskirts of New York City, where 23 years earlier, the children had found Sonny Red's corpse. From a distance, the media documented the scene as the FBI began its excavation.
We were working probably 13, 14-hour days. The 3rd or 4th day, we found some kind of bone that ended up being a dog that had died there many years ago.
Strangely enough, the dog bones did suggest there was a connection between the site and the mob. Mobsters would gather at waste grounds for socializing and gambling on illegal dogfights. And in the late 1970s, Joe Massino may have used such settings to hang out with his mob friends when he was just starting his rise within the Bonanno family. At the dig, FBI agents were after human remains that might connect back directly to the triple murders and resolve the case against Massino. The excavation was the last chapter in the FBI's pursuit of the Bonanno crime family. It's a story that began with one man who infiltrated the Mafia family before the triple murders ever happened. FBI agent Joe Pistone, perhaps better known by his undercover name Donnie Brasco, was inside the Bonannos at a time of great unrest.
The danger level was pretty high because of the fact that there was a war going on within the Bonanno family for control of the family.
When Pistone began infiltrating the mob in 1976, very little was known about the actual workings of the Mafia families, how they were organized, how decisions were made, and who the real players were.
My goal for infiltrating was basically to gather as much evidence and much intelligence about the Bonanno family and then ultimately about the mob as I could. All the illegal activities that the family was doing, the positions, who were the captains, who had the power in the family.
This was not a job for the faint-hearted.
It's a violent group, so you can't be worried about whether you're going to come out of it in one piece, whether you're going to come out of it alive. It's just something that you do.
What he did was assume the role of a fictitious jewel thief from Florida named Donnie Brasco.
And the reason I was a jewel thief is because it's basically not associated with violence. You know, not too many jewel thieves in jail for murder. And one thing you have to remember, the mob is not an equal opportunity employer. You have to be white, male, and Italian to be a member of the American Mafia. And you have to show that you have a good ability to make money illegally.
Pistone used jewelry confiscated by the FBI to prove his worth to his mob connections. Eventually, Pistone became what's called an associate of the mob. The next level, that of a soldier, would bring him into closer contact with the upper echelons of the family, including the triple murder suspects.
You're a soldier, you're a wise guy, you're a good fellow, you're straightened out, you're a button man. These are all, all these terms mean the same thing. Your guide has been officially indoctrinated into any particular mafia family.
Pistone was hoping to get his chance with the Bonannos. But in order to become a true soldier, he would have to perform one task that was required of all low-level mobsters: commit murder. Only then would he become a made man.
You don't join the Mafia if you're not willing to do bad things to people. One of the requirements, you got to make your bones, you got to kill somebody.
By early 1981, it appeared that Pistone would finally get his chance. Massino's faction was, in fact, thinking of including Pistone in a takeover bid. He was supposed to be in on the triple murders themselves, the corpses now hidden in the gangland graveyard. In the spring of 1981, mobster Joe Massino organized a triple murder that wiped out his rivals for control of the Bonanno crime family. It was a ruthless move that boldly started his push for power. But even with an undercover FBI agent pursuing him from within, many years later the FBI was still digging for answers to close a case that had baffled them for decades. After clearing tons of rubbish, the FBI were finally getting to where the bones were buried. But they hit a snag.
At about 4 feet, the groundwater started to come in. And we were digging deep. We were trying to pump out the water at the same time. And when the water was pretty low in the hole, we actually had people going in, basically just breaking through the water and the mud with their hands to see if they could find anything.
Agent Ostrobinski worried that her team would miss evidence the water hadn't already washed away.
There was only probably 1 or 2 agents in the hole because you're almost dealing with like quicksand. On the 8th day, it's very muddy. We're in a big giant hole. We have people going through the hole on their hands and knees through the water and through the mud, and we finally find our first bone.
Their first human bone. Although there was no immediate direct connection to the triple murders, the find gave the team hope.
As soon as we found that, we knew we had our spot, and everybody was back in it. We were ready to go again.
But despite their restored enthusiasm, the site did not give up its ghosts easily. The mud made sifting for smaller bone fragments nearly impossible as agents searched for evidence of murder.
We just were taking the mud and trying to squeeze it through the sifting screens that we had. That just wasn't working. So what we developed was a water sifting operation. We took the fire hydrant that we had at the scene and we used that as our water supply, and we would dump dirt onto our sifting screens and then basically wash it through. You basically have to adapt as you go. You have to think of innovative ideas. You have to think outside the box, and that's what we did in this case. And from there, everything else started coming. And that's when we really focused in on getting that area dug out as much as we could and then sifting through everything in that area.
One of the major discoveries came straight out of a mound of mud. Investigators hoped this find would provide forensic evidence that would tie the newly discovered bones directly to the 1981 triple murders. A gunshot wound can leave a telltale signature in the bone. Even after 20 years of decomposition, forensic experts should be able to decipher the signs. They can study how a gunshot damages a skull by firing into a head of an animal carcass and then examining the damage. Dr. Al Harper, a forensic anthropologist who trains FBI evidence response agents, examines and x-rays the skull.
What we're looking at is the entry hole of a bullet and the powder burn around it. You can feel a fracture that runs from the bullet hole towards the occipital or back area of the skull.
The damage to the skull goes far beyond the entry wound and the path of the bullet itself.
As the bullet enters the brain, the tremendous force of the bullet has to be dissipated someplace. And this area, you can see that's where the bullet hole entered. Maybe looking at a fracture line along here. The brain itself absorbs most of this energy and expands and forces the fractures apart, and so we get a fracture like we see in the sheep where the bone is literally blown away from the brain.
While an analysis was begun on the human skull, office for DNA analysis. The process is always a careful and slow one, but if enough DNA could be extracted from the decomposing material, it would lead to a positive identification of the remains. And if the gangland graveyard bodies proved to be those of the missing men from 1981, they would finally give the FBI the forensic evidence necessary to close the book on the triple murders. When the hits first went down and the men disappeared without a trace, there was no physical evidence, just Pistone. Pistone was getting close to the action. To infiltrate any Mafia family involved developing personal relationships with the mob, the intelligence being gathered by undercover agent Joe Bisters themselves. Pistone needed men in the Bonanno crime family to trust him, and by the time of the triple murders, an important member called Sonny Black had already befriended him and brought him into the family.
This was the Motion Lounge in 1979, 1980s, and this was the headquarters of the Sonny Black Napolitano faction of the crime family. This is where they hung out, they did all their business here. This is where Donnie Brasco, Joe Pistone, kind of infiltrated and became close to Sonny Black.
At the time, Sonny Black had no idea who Pistone really was. But 20 years later, as the undercover agent returned to his old haunts, he was still recognized and reviled by old Mafia friends.
Here's the Motion Lounge. Now it's the San Giuseppe Club.
What was that?
Somebody called us an effing rat. So I guess we still tick them off out here. Sonny was a tough guy. But he had another side, too, that you didn't mind being with him, hanging out.
But he was a ruthless mobster. And by early 1981, he was deeply involved with Joe Massino in a plot to get rid of their competition within the Bonanno family.
Having discussions, you talk about anything with Sonny. He wasn't a 24-hour-a-day wise guy, you know?
The men who had to go were all captains in their own right. Sonny Red Indelicado, Big Trinchera, and Phil Lucky Jacone. And on May the 5th, 1981, they vanished.
These guys were three high-profile guys in the Bonanno family. It's no big secret when somebody goes missing, you know. If he doesn't show up in a couple of days, you know he's whacked.
Just days after the hits, Pistone was called in for a meeting with his captain, Sonny Black.
And he tells me those guys are gone. So I know who he's talking about, you know. Nobody mentions names. Those guys are gone. And I knew there was the opposition, who the opposition was.
Black never named the victims, but did make it clear that both he and Massino were involved in the hits.
I mean, this is what I was told, all right? I mean, I wasn't there when they did this, but I was told it was Joey Massino's responsibility to get rid of Sonny Red. That was his responsibility. And I don't know whose responsibility it was to get rid of Big Trin and Phil Luck.
Grew up was in the burial of